Okay. So, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us wherever you are in the world. It's what makes my job so exciting is that I get to chat with individuals from all places around the globe at multiple different time zones all at once. So it's really interesting. So thank you all for making the effort from wherever you are. Today, we're really talking about a topic that may feel incredibly personal and often deeply distressing. Scrupulosity, a form of OCD that centers around fears of doing something morally or religiously wrong. And we are delighted to be joined by Reverend Dr. Katie O'Dunn. Katie is an ordained minister, educator, and founder of Stick with the Ick. Just love that name. An inclusive community supporting people navigating faith and OCD. She's also the chair of the IOCDF Faith and OCD Action Council and has dedicated her work to helping individuals, clinicians, faith leaders better understand the intersections of OCD, spirituality, and religious life. Katie brings a unique perspective, combining her experience in ministry, education, advocacy, and mental health. And today we'll be exploring what scrupulosity is, why it can feel so overwhelming, and how people can begin responding to these fears in ways that support both recovery and meaningful engagement with their values and beliefs. And she has an incredible social media presence, so go follow her as well. And I'm sure she's going to be giving us all those details at the end. So, Katie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for the beautiful work that y'all are doing.
Of
And
course.
thank you
Thank
to
you.
our live attendees and our attendees who are watching after the fact. Very similarly, my favorite thing is getting to work with people all over the world and in all different time zones with different experiences and reminding folks
Yeah.
that we are united by the same experience with
Mhm.
OCD and the hope of stepping forward in recovery and moving forward. So excited to be here today.
Oh, it's an absolute honor to have you. It was definitely a goal and objective to have you on the discussion here. So thank you. It's definitely an honor on our side. For those who are seeing your face for the very first time, maybe if you can just, and who are not familiar with your work, can you maybe just share with us a little bit about yourself and what first drew you to faith and the work in OCD?
Yeah. I always think I kind of have two parallel stories that eventually intersected that brought me to do this work. And one of those pieces that's more public is the ministry side, but the other
Mm.
is my lived experience with OCD. And I've navigated OCD since before I can remember. A lot of my earliest memories actually relate to doing things in a certain way or touching things in a particular order or trying to pray just right to keep people that I loved safe.
Mhm.
I always
Mm.
think back to the earliest obsession that I can remember was in elementary school. We had a teacher that talked to us somehow about the sun getting too close to the earth someday and something bad happening. And I took that to mean that if I did everything right, the sun wouldn't get too close to the earth and
Mm.
I would be able to protect the planet. And this was a lot as a 6-year-old to feel like if I do everything
Absolutely.
right, I'm going to protect the whole world. But I took that on and
Mm.
ended up going to my first therapist by the age of 8 because I had lost a family member to cancer and thought it was my fault because of my OCD.
Mm. Mm.
And unfortunately, it was not an OCD specialist. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more today, but wasn't doing an evidence-based form of treatment. We were doing some talk therapy while playing checkers. And because of my OCD, I was worried that if I didn't get better, this person would lose their job. So I pretended to get better. I said, "Okay, I'm cured. You fixed me."
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
really continued to move through my life really good at hiding the compulsions that I was doing,
Mm.
often
Mm.
in secret. So by the time I hit seminary, I was doing my Master of Divinity at Emory in Atlanta, where I am now. My OCD was pretty bad, and it was also pretty hidden. I was way too good at hiding it. And
Mm.
I got to
Mm.
the point that I wasn't sleeping. I was driving back to churches where I was interning to make sure candles were blown out and things were locked. I was driving to downtown Atlanta in the middle of the night to try to prevent bad things from happening. I mean, all sorts of
Mm,
stuff.
mm,
And was taking a course at the School of Public Health and heard about OCD for the first time in a different way and
mm,
thought, wait, this isn't what I thought OCD was. I think I actually might have this thing. And
mm.
went to a mentor in the church at the time and said, I think I have OCD and need treatment. And unfortunately, was told, well, Katie, you're up and coming in ministry. You're getting ready to get ordained. Don't tell anybody. Don't get
Wow.
treatment. No one will respect you in ministry.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I have
Mm,
so many thoughts about that now. I tell
mm,
a lot of
mm,
young people going into ministry that it is
mm,
so okay to seek treatment and it's a
mhm,
beautiful thing, and we'll get into that.
mm,
But it really, I don't know, just made me carry this additional level of shame. So I
mm.
kept shoving it down. I actually studied how to lie on my psych evaluations so that it wouldn't come up before ordination. And I was ordained at the age of 25 and moved into my first role as the academy chaplain at the biggest private school in the continental US. So I started
Wow.
as the first
Wow.
female in this role. I was 25 years
Amazing.
old. My
Yeah.
predecessor had been there for 25 years. I was the religious leader for 2,700 families, and I was in this place of
Wow.
wanting to get it right. I'm
Mm,
young. I'm, the first of a lot of things. I want to do this correctly. And of course, OCD loves that. And my
mm,
OCD latched on to everything from faith to morality to the safety of my students. And ultimately, I experienced some back-to-back tragedies where I lost some students that I cared really deeply about. And my OCD latched on and blamed me for that in ways related to
mm,
harm and scrupulosity and false memory OCD. Um, I was very fortunate at that point. I hit my lowest point and I started trying to confess to crimes in Atlanta that I hadn't committed just in case, and found out really I needed treatment for OCD. And I always say this is before virtual and telehealth was cool. This was before really
yeah.
COVID,
Yeah.
all of these things took
Yeah.
off, and
Yeah.
found an amazing ERP specialist in Atlanta who was willing to work with me virtually and intensively at night so that I could
Wow.
continue in my role.
Mm,
So I actually
mm,
continued in this really public role while engaging in treatment, and I
mm,
got better for the first time and started to reclaim my life and didn't want to be quiet about it anymore. Especially for the students that I was working with who were Jewish and Christian and Muslim and Buddhist and Sikh and from all different backgrounds. I wanted them to know that they could engage in their faith traditions and seek treatment, and that there was no
yeah.
shame in that, that those things were
Mm,
not mutually exclusive or shameful. Um,
mm,
so I let a group of my students write an article about the chaplain who had been seeking OCD treatment in secret and blast it out to 2,700 families.
yeah.
And I always say that was the point I thought I was going to get fired because I had not gotten permission from the president. What are they going to think? And it was the opposite. I was really supported by the
Mm,
academy and started hearing from families like, "Ooh, Chaplain K, we really we really trust you more now that you're actually being human in this. How do we get our child
yeah.
treatment? How do we talk to our
Wow.
priest, to our rabbi, to our
Wow.
imam?"
Mm,
So
mm,
that was transformational for me. And about the same
mm,
time, I started doing advocacy with the International OCD Foundation, where we planned the first Faith in OCD conference that we thought would be a one-off. And
mhm,
1,000 people signed up and started to recognize there's a lot more here. So I started
mm,
consulting on scrupulosity cases around the world, fell in love with it, and made the hard choice to leave my educational chaplaincy role to go back and do doctoral work in this area and to try to launch something new in kind of a different lane and to really focus life and research in this area. So huge passion professionally, but for me, so much of it is also very
yeah.
personal and
100. Absolutely.
turning pain into purpose. Yeah.
Wow, I have so many questions. Maybe just the first one, you kind of mentioned that you saw a different side of OCD and you're like, oh, is this what it is? And that's how you identified with it. At that time, what did you think that OCD was?
Hmm.
If it wasn't something that you were experiencing, what did you think was OCD back then?
Yeah. I mean, I think like so many of us, I thought it was this cute quirk or organizational trait that we saw in the media.
Hmm.
I definitely didn't think it was defined by intrusive thoughts that would terrify the sufferer and compulsions repeated over and over and over again
Yeah,
to alleviate
yeah,
that discomfort.
yeah.
I just thought it was somebody enjoying doing something in a particular way, which later found
Yeah.
out it's ego dystonic. It has nothing to do with that. But I was really surprised. I had no idea my whole life that even in going to lots of different therapists that were non-OCD specialists, that what I was
Mm.
experiencing was OCD.
The amount of responsibility, you literally had the world on your shoulders,
Hmm.
from the age of 6
Hmm.
to 25 plus. It's a
Yeah.
very long time to feel responsible for everything,
Everybody.
for everybody, and even things outside of our globe, the solar system. Like, and then to even confess to crimes that you didn't even commit, just in case.
Just in case.
I can't even imagine what that must have felt like. Just feeling maybe so alone and just uh, so overwhelming.
It was, I mean, I think back and it was the lowest point of my life, especially. And it was not, if when I think about it in the scheme of things, it wasn't that long ago. I hit my lowest point
Hmm.
in 2018.
Hmm.
And I mean,
Yeah,
it's not that long ago. And I remember
yeah.
just the pain of the actual kind of trauma that I was experiencing with
Mm,
losing people and students that I cared
mm,
about. But I also remember standing up and officiating funerals and thinking, what if this is my fault? And would
mm,
be preaching in the middle of those services and think, but
mm.
could this be my fault? Could I have prevented this? Oh my gosh, I'm an awful person. And it
Yeah.
was just, I can't even describe how painful it was. And for me, I
Mm,
always like to kind of go back to as we talk about OCD, we often think about anxiety, but discomfort can come in so many different forms. And for
yeah.
me, it came with really intense guilt and shame that was very much misplaced, but that felt real enough that, I mean, I
Mm,
used to run to the bathroom and get sick between teaching classes at the time because it felt so intense.
yeah. Wow. So then, what is stick with the ick? How did it
Yeah.
come about, and what were you hoping that it would achieve and address?
Yeah. So, Stick with the Ick is a virtual community and app that offers support for individuals with OCD, clinicians, and clergy. And it's really the only interfaith scrupulosity and OCD related space. And It actually came out of my doctoral work. And I was doing my Doctor of Ministry in integrative chaplaincy at Vanderbilt and was focusing on the idea of reimagining ERP as a spiritual practice. And this idea that embracing uncertainty, taking a leap of faith, doing hard things actually
Mm,
helps us to kind of stop worshiping OCD and reconnect
mm,
with our
mm,
life
mm,
in a beautiful, value-driven way, and that can be a really spiritual thing. But in doing that, I started to recognize how isolated so many people felt, and so many
mm,
ministers and priests and, imams and rabbis and chaplains and also clinicians in talking about this topic that can feel really scary and really isolating.
mm,
And started to recognize that in addition to consulting on cases with this research and doing one-off trainings, that we needed to have a space where people could come together and recognize that they weren't alone. So Stick with the Ick really emerged out of that. And now we have about 2,000 Icksters from different faith
wow.
backgrounds.
Wow.
And we have a whole free resource side, and then we have a community side with multiple support groups a week around
Mm,
scrupulosity and training stuff and moderated chats and all sorts of themes, all led by clinicians and clergy together. And then we also have a
amazing.
training institute for both clinicians and clergy navigating interfaith literacy. But it really came out of that idea that we can't do this alone. And
Hmm.
my favorite part is the interfaith component. and being able to see people from around the world from different faith backgrounds,
Hmm.
recognizing, wait,
Hmm.
I have a really similar experience. My faith is different, but my OCD's latched onto my faith in a really similar way,
Yeah.
and we can connect
Yeah.
over that and support each other.
I think that's what stood out for me the most in what you were talking. Well, one of the things, there were so many actually, that I really enjoy what you said and what you do is that you are an inclusive community. It doesn't matter what faith
Mm-mm.
you're practicing. I've got you. I see you. You're part of this community. You're accepted, and I really love that. That's so beautiful, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's my favorite.
amazing.
I'll brag on some of our Ixters for a
Yeah.
second. So I mean, I
Yeah.
formerly was a religious educator and did interfaith work, and that was my favorite thing
Yeah.
in school chaplaincy.
Mm,
But it's
mm.
really neat now, actually, to see people in the community beyond just OCD say, "Wow, I never realized that I would have a friend from a different faith tradition, from a different part of the world, and that
Right?
we could really
Yeah.
connect with each other in that way."
Uh-huh.
And it's just,
Uh-huh.
it's my favorite thing. It's really my
Yeah.
favorite.
So beautiful. So scrupulosity, I
Mhm.
think I had to practice that a couple times to say it right. It's a difficult word and I have a lisp, so I was very nervous.
No, you're
It's
perfect.
quite,
You said it great.
thank you. It's quite a word. So for someone who's never heard that before, they're here listening to this conversation. What is it? And if you can explain to us in simple language, so we can understand what is it all about, and how does it relate to OCD?
Yeah. Yeah. So I always like to take a step back first and kind of share how I define OCD and then how does this
Hmm.
relate to scrupulosity.
Please.
And I often describe OCD and as really gross ice cream that happens to show up in a lot of different nasty artificial flavors. It's all the same ice cream. It's all the same OCD, but it shows
Hmm.
up in different ways based on the things that are the most important to us. And it might taste a little bit different because of that artificial flavoring, but it's still OCD, just wearing different masks. And scrupulosity, in particular, is that gross flavor of OCD that just happens to relate to our faith or to our morality. And it isn't because there's something wrong with your faith or your moral compass. It's
Mm,
actually because you care so deeply about those things that
mm,
OCD wants to come in there and latch onto it because it's so important to you. So scrupulosity actually is something that's been around for a very long time within religious communities and has been recognized long before we named it as something related to OCD. And it actually comes from the Latin word scrupulum, which means small, sharp stone. And I often
okay.
imagine it as having kind of this little pebble in your shoe.
Hmm.
If you've ever
Hmm.
walked down the street and felt a pebble in your shoe, and the more you thought about it, the more you wanted to get rid of it, the
Hmm.
bigger it
Hmm.
felt. And I
Hmm.
often think of scrupulosity in that same way. We're having all of these intrusive thoughts, these obsessions about our faith and about our morality. And the more we want them to go away, the more we want to fix them, the bigger and bigger they feel. Compulsions in this area often relate to religious practice. It can also relate to kind of moral actions. It can relate to rumination. And I think one of the challenges with scrupulosity is a lot of the things that people do compulsively can look like genuine faith practice. It might look like someone praying or going to
Yeah.
confession again and
Yeah.
again or ritually
Yeah.
washing in just the right way, but the
Yeah.
function is a little bit different. The reason that someone is doing that is because they're so scared and because there's fear and guilt and urgency, and I need to get it right because of this intrusive thought, as
Mm.
opposed to from a place of meaning and connection and joy. So I'll pause there, but the nuts and bolts of it is it's just a type of OCD that happens to be latched on to your faith and to your morality.
So then how is it different from sincerely practicing one's faith or caring deeply about your personal values? You did mention the intention is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and
The
and can
function
you,
is
yeah. And can you maybe give us like a real life example of what that might actually look like?
Yeah. So the function of the behavior is different. And I always use the example of prayer can be a really great example. And actually, there can be value-driven prayer and OCD-driven prayer within the same day. So if I woke up this morning and I said, "Oh, God, I am so excited about this day. I get to go and do this really cool webinar with Stop OCD. Thank you for this opportunity. Please give me strength. Amen." Wow, that sounds like something that's really value driven, that's really
Mm,
meaningful to me,
mm,
that
mm,
connects with my
mm,
practices. But maybe later today, I realize that I'm worried God's upset with me, and I'm worried that I might have done something wrong or I might have offended someone, and I'm really scared, and I feel like I need to pray right now, and I need to pray just right in order to make sure everything's okay. My palms are sweating. I feel like I'm shaking. And I start this prayer and I say, God, I'm really sorry. I think I might have messed everything up. Can you please, please, please make sure I didn't do anything wrong and that nothing bad's going to happen? Amen. And then I realize, oh wait, no, I think I didn't do that prayer right. Let me try again just to make sure I get it right. The function behind both of those things, regardless of the
mm,
content, is so
mm,
different. One is
mm,
from a space of meaning and connection and really my authentic faith practices. And the other is strictly driven by fear and urgency and guilt. And if I don't do this
mm,
right,
mm,
something bad is going to happen. And often, I think about with the fear side in particular. Um, Gosh, so I always say that the OCD kind of side of spiritual practice often relates to fear. And sometimes I'll have folks say, well, if a plane's going down and you pray because you're scared, that's not OCD. And it's not.
mhm,
But the function
mhm,
of the prayer is because you're trying to come back to connection or come back to something that's meaningful.
mhm,
It's not
mhm,
praying because you're afraid not to pray. And often OCD looks like someone doing the ritual again and again because they're afraid not to, because they're afraid something bad will happen if they don't. It typically exceeds normative practice with the rest of the individuals in that community. We usually will look at the 80-20 rule of what do 80% of folks within your sect or your denomination or your community engage in. And with OCD, it's typically way beyond that. And again, not for the function of connection, but because someone's really scared or feeling really guilty or
mm,
feeling like they have
mm,
to do this thing. Um,
mm,
and I'll also say that it can feel really tricky because for individuals in this cycle, it feels like, well, I have to do this to connect with my faith. When the reality is, we get to a point where we're kind of almost worshiping OCD instead of
yeah,
God.
yeah,
And it's we're doing all of these things to appease what OCD
mhm,
is telling us we have to
mhm,
do, as
mhm.
opposed to authentically connecting with our faith or our morality.
That's a really interesting point. And I'm wondering, for you and for anyone who is experiencing scrupulosity and they're praying and in order just to get things right or to because they're feeling the guilt of the world or whatever it may be, do they find relief in one after they've prayed?
Yeah. So
Does it offer relief?
when they pray compulsively,
Yeah.
yeah. So I always say, and I always am on live streams and I'm like, I'm going to be cautious about this. But the first time they might get a little
Yeah.
bit of relief. And that's why we
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
do that compulsion that first time,
Exactly.
but it
Yeah.
doesn't last. OCD
Mm-hmm.
pokes holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's like we can never quite get that relief that we seek. We can never
Yeah.
quite scratch that
Yeah.
itch. And it
Yeah.
gets bigger and bigger and throws us
Mm-hmm.
back into
Mm-hmm.
the cycle. And I talk about scrupulosity all day, every day, and I'll have people get very frustrated with me that I will not directly answer some of their theological questions that are from a space of urgency. And they'll say, Katie, if you just answer this one time, or let me do this one compulsive prayer, then I'll feel
Yeah.
better. And I would say,
Yeah.
you might for like a minute, and then you're going to feel
Yeah.
so much worse. And I really
Yeah.
believe, I always joke, especially with folks from the Christian faith. I'll say, well, if God or if Jesus came and sat right in front of you and answered this question, your OCD would still poke a hole in it a few minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, well, did I
Mm-hmm.
really explain it correctly? Are we really sure? So yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
compulsion is never going to ultimately give us that relief we seek.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to put us back into that cycle.
Because the compulsion is so related to a not a real life thing, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but uh, pray, for instance. You are in the community, in the religious community. This is what you do on a daily basis. So that can get quite confusing. When it comes to treatment, do some people worry that they have to compromise or abandon their faith or their beliefs in order to deal with the OCD?
Have you been in my email inbox? Because that is what I get hundreds of times a day. Yeah. My entire email inbox
Yeah,
actually is that.
yeah, yeah.
It's, dear Katie, I'm starting treatment and
Mm,
I'm really scared
mm,
I'm going to have to compromise my faith. I'm
okay.
really scared that ERP is in opposition to my faith or that I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
asked to do something that's against my faith.
Yeah.
And I tell people again and again that that is really not the case. Now, sometimes in treatment we will have to take a step back or pause or change the frequency of practices.
Mm,
But it's not
mm,
because
mm,
you're stepping away from your faith. It's we're learning how to not worship OCD so that you can connect with your faith more fully.
yeah.
And I have seen again and again with individuals across religious and spiritual traditions that they walk out of treatment and it actually isn't that they step away from their faith. They're actually typically more connected.
Walking
But
towards, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, in a
I
way
love
that's
that.
actually
Mm-hmm.
meaningful to them and their tradition. I've seen it with folks who are Christian and
Mm,
Muslim and Jewish and Hindu. I see it again and again. And
mm,
it's such a beautiful thing, but that fear is always there of
mm,
what if this is in opposition to my faith? And it's one of the reasons that I love to talk about ERP as a spiritual practice. If we're defining a spiritual practice as anything we're doing that's challenging and uncertain as a way to reconnect with our faith, whew, ERP really fits that bill. We're doing something really tough.
mm,
We're making
yeah.
a choice to do something different so that we
Mm.
actually can connect from a space of meaning again.
So I want to get to a question that relates to this sort of concern, but I
Yeah.
want to touch on this quickly because you've just sort of spoken about it. You're talking a lot about ERP, and
Mhm.
again, maybe for some who are not so familiar with what ERP is, can you share what it is and why it is so effective in
Yeah.
treating and managing scrupulosity?
Yeah. So ERP is the gold standard treatment for OCD, and it's exposure and response prevention. And it falls under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy. But it's a really specific treatment that is really important for OCD. And I always like to say, on a personal level, it's very much the treatment that saved my life. So
Hmm.
I have been there, and I know that the way that it sounds might be challenging. But
Yeah.
it really involves two parts. It involves an exposure and the response prevention. And the exposure is about doing something challenging in order to intentionally bring up those feelings of discomfort that we talked about, whether that's
Mm,
fear or guilt or shame or anxiety or anything else. And that, in the frame of scrupulosity, might be praying imperfectly. It might be intentionally bringing on an intrusive thought in a place of worship. It might be
mm,
walking by a place of worship while reading a particular word that's really challenging or scary for you.
mm,
It might be, I don't know, listening to a particular song that has a really scary word while saying a prayer right after. There's so many different things we can think
mm,
of, that
mm,
anything that'll bring
mm,
up for that particular person. But the response prevention is actually even more important. And a good friend of mine that I work with in this space often says little e and big RP. And the
okay.
response prevention is all about then not engaging in the compulsion that OCD wants us to do to feel better.
Mm,
We do
mm,
that exposure and then we practice literally sticking with the ick. That's where stick with the
mhm,
ick came from,
mhm,
sitting with those uncomfortable feelings while continuing to move toward everything we care about. And I think when we're doing ERP, when we're working with our providers, I always see it as practice for life. You're working with
yeah,
awesome
yeah,
therapists like with
yeah,
Stop OCD, and you're
mhm,
building a hierarchy where you start with things that are less challenging and you build to things that are
mm,
more challenging with the goal
mhm,
of not doing that compulsion. Um, and it works because you kind of go through this process of inhibitory learning and learn that maybe I don't have to actually engage in that compulsion to feel safe.
mm,
Maybe I
yeah,
can do something a little bit different. And it initially feels really scary. And
Mm,
I always tell folks if you are starting this process, like with Stop OCD, and you're feeling scared, it's because you're doing it right. And it is
mhm,
okay to feel scared.
mm,
We have to feel scared to get OCD to come out of its cave so that we can make it smaller. So you're intentionally kind of bringing up this fear so you can do something different, so you can rewire your brain, and so you can
mm.
reclaim your life.
Thank you for explaining that. I want to then go back to what we were talking about just before we started talking about ERP. And it relates to what are some of the biggest misconceptions about scrupulosity have you encountered, and that maybe some individuals here are concerned about. Maybe it is because of society or media, whatever it may be. But what are some of the misconceptions?
Yeah, I think there's both misconceptions about scrupulosity itself, and then
Mm,
there's
mm,
misconceptions about treatment.
yeah.
So with scrupulosity itself, unfortunately, I see so many people that think, well, this must be because there's something wrong with my faith. I'm having all of these scary questions because I just didn't pray hard enough, or I just didn't do this thing right, or because I'm being punished. And unfortunately, there are lots of challenging spaces that kind of push that narrative or that use that to get likes on social media. There are
Mm,
also people
mm,
who have challenging, a lot of times I'll see overlaps between religious scrupulosity and challenging spiritual experiences in communities,
mm,
where sometimes someone is
mm,
hearing similar narratives that their OCD is telling them. But yeah,
mm,
I'll have a lot of people come and say, well, there must be something wrong with me. I must not be praying right. I must be punished. All of these different things. And that's a big
mm,
misconception. And I tell folks again and again, it's an OCD issue. It is not a faith issue. You have not done anything wrong, and you are so deserving of treatment and support the same way we would support someone with cancer or
mm,
diabetes or
mhm,
any other
mhm.
illness.
Yeah.
So I think there's that misconception. And then with treatment, we've already hit on it a little bit, but there's a really big misconception that engaging in treatment will make someone less faithful, or that by doing exposure, someone is opposing their faith. And it's just not the
Mm,
case.
mm,
I train so many clinicians in interfaith literacy for ERP, and most really amazing OCD specialists are great at leaning into culturally responsive exposures and really focusing on helping someone move toward their values as opposed to away from their faith. So I always want folks to know with those two misconceptions that despite what you may hear,
mm.
you aren't doing anything wrong, and treatment can actually help you as a part of this process.
Thank you. Something that just popped into my mind now that we didn't even touch on is how common is scrupulosity? Again, it's not a word that I have heard before until I heard of Reverend
Oh,
Katie O'Dunn. So how common is it? How many people around the globe do you think experience scrupulosity?
yeah, I don't want to give an exact number because it's shifted
Mm,
recently. There's
mm.
kind of constantly
Of
new
course,
stats coming
of
out, and
course.
so I'm always cautious with that because even the stats with OCD have gone up. And I always say
Mm,
whatever the current
mm.
number is, it's definitely higher because so many people don't know
100%.
what it is that people.
Yeah,
But within the OCD
correct.
realm, it's so common. It's really common. And I would say, you know, you would be even just with social media, with the amount of content and things I put out with OCD and the IOCDF, so many people who are diagnosed with other manifestations or subtypes of OCD end up at some point hitting
Mm,
on
mm,
scrupulosity. And the reason I would say is because again, if OCD is going to latch onto something that's important to us, well, this kind of
hmm.
fits the bill for most people.
Yeah,
Either morality
yeah.
or faith show up there.
Mm, mm,
And I think the other piece I always want to represent is that it's not just for people who are religious or who have grown up in religious or spiritual
mm,
environments.
mm,
I see actually a lot of people who are atheist or agnostic who navigate religious scrupulosity. And some of that can even just be because religion's important in your particular culture. So I'm in the South in Georgia, and we're kind of in the Bible Belt here.
Yeah.
And I end up seeing a lot of folks in this area that don't identify with a particular religion, but feel like they need to do these compulsions just in case. Well, just in case this higher power that isn't a part of my belief could
Mm,
punish me, I want to do this thing.
mm.
Um, but it's
That's really interesting.
incredibly common within the OCD space. And I would say, so anecdotally, I'm working on a research study right now with Baylor College of Medicine on the intersection between religious trauma and spiritual abuse and scrupulosity. And I actually think there are a lot of people, in challenging, who have been in challenging religious communities who also have scrupulosity, who haven't been diagnosed. So I think the diagnosis rate is way lower than what it
Mm-hmm.
actually is. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think those two things could exist at the same time. Someone who's not then religious or has faith can still experience scrupulosity. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that. Could you share maybe another example of how we could see that manifesting?
Oh yeah, this is I get so excited talking about all of these things. This is like my passion here. But no, I have seen many examples of individuals who identify again as atheist, agnostic, or humanist
Yeah,
who
yeah.
actually go to repetitively confess to a Catholic priest or to talk to a rabbi just to make sure. Or I had one who was going to a Hindu temple repetitively, and it wasn't in line with their practice. It wasn't because they were discerning or exploring. It was strictly, if this divine force exists that I don't necessarily believe in, I want to make sure that I'm not in trouble and that I haven't done anything wrong. And I
Okay.
just need to keep doing this just to check, just to make sure. And it is so painful for those
I'm
individuals
sure.
that it really
Yeah.
doesn't align with who they are, what
Mm,
they believe, how they grew
mm,
up,
mm.
but feel like they have to really connect in that way, go to those
Yeah,
spaces
yeah,
repetitively.
yeah.
Hmm.
That can be incredibly confusing. Um, Not sort of having that faith, but feeling compelled to go there
Hmm.
just in case. Gosh, yeah.
No,
Thank
and
you
to
for sharing
do,
that.
yeah, absolutely. And to do the rituals just in case. And
Mm-hmm.
I always like to tell folks, we have quite a few folks in Stick with the Ick that have navigated that too, that, we're there for you too. And this is, again, just OCD latching on in a different way. But I
Mm,
think there's this process sometimes that we forget about with scrupulosity that we focus on a lot and Stick with the Ick of, okay, once we've kind of broken down the OCD, then how do we figure out what do we actually believe without that? Like, who am I under all of
yeah,
this? And
yeah,
that becomes really important too for people to be able to
yeah.
discover who am I authentically as opposed to what
Mm,
OCD is telling me.
yeah. So, what would you say to family members, friends, clergy, or faith leaders who want to support someone with scrupulosity? What would you say to them?
I would say, first of all, it's, I know, really challenging and it can be very much a family disorder.
Hmm.
I have OCD. My partner also has OCD. Him and I met in the OCD community and support each other. And I think authentically, even the hardest thing for us is not reassuring. And we talked earlier about compulsions not
Mm.
ultimately helping, but just continuing
Yeah,
that cycle.
yeah.
Reassurance is a really sneaky compulsion that can be really hard for family members and faith leaders not to engage in. So for instance, the thing that I see the most commonly with scrupulosity is someone going to their faith leader and saying, but are you sure that God's not mad at me? Are you sure theologically for sure that I'm not going to hell or that this bad thing isn't going to happen or that it's
Mm,
okay that I touch this before communion? And I see
mm,
these really amazing, well-meaning clergy members saying, "No, you really are fine." And then the
mm,
person comes back in the next day with even more questions.
mm, hmm,
Because
hmm.
OCD pokes some new holes. The same comes up with family members. So what I encourage both clergy and other supporters to do is, well, of course, if you're acknowledging and recognizing that someone might have OCD, to bring that up with them gently and to potentially offer resources and referrals for an OCD specialist who's able to do the things we talked about today, like
Yeah,
ERP,
yeah,
Stop OCD would be a
yeah,
great
yeah.
resource.
Hmm.
But also in those moments where someone might be feeling frantic or asking for
Mm,
reassurance, to try to do
Mm.
something different. And I always say we can affirm the feeling without reassuring the content. So rather than saying, oh, it's totally going to be okay, we might say, wow, it looks like you are really distressed right now. I am so sorry that you're feeling so much guilt and fear and shame. This sounds a lot like the OCD that we've talked about before. So I'm not going to give you reassurance. I know that might feel really frustrating, but I
Mm.
will sit here with you in that emotion. So why don't we sit with it together? And why don't we practice a skill or a tool for coming back to the moment?
That's really
So I think
helpful.
that can be really helpful so that both
Yeah.
clergy and family members can know it doesn't
Mm.
mean that you have to
Mm.
turn your back and walk away. You can be
Mm.
with someone
Mhm.
without
Mhm.
diving into the content.
Are there things other than the reassurance that well-meaning supporters and loved ones often do accidentally that
Hmm.
reinforce the OCD cycle?
Yeah. So definitely the reassurance piece, accommodation, helping individuals engage in their compulsions, is definitely something that's not helpful, but can be so well-meaning. I think.
What does that look like? So what does accommodation look like?
Yeah. So accommodation, the simplest example that I always like to give is so when I was growing up, I had a lot of difficulty not checking ovens, stoves, and locks multiple
Mm.
times to make
Mm.
sure that they were off. So I got to the point where it was like, well, this is too hard and I don't trust myself. So I'm just gonna have my mom do it for me and tell me
Okay.
that she's done it. So
Okay.
my I would say, Mom, can you go check the stove for me? And she would check it and say, okay, it's off. Well, she's actually just accommodating my OCD. She's helping me engage in those
Mm. Mm.
compulsions. So it might be things like that. It might be doing an anxiety provoking thing for your loved one. Maybe they're afraid to touch something when they're getting ready for bed, so you do it for them instead. That becomes kind of a compulsive reinforcement of that cycle. Um, the other, I mean, if we're talking about on the flip side, sometimes that I see with family members and faith leaders, is which I want to validate, getting frustrated with OCD makes so much
Mm.
sense because it
Mhm.
can be so frustrating both for the person
Mhm.
experiencing it and the ones around
Yeah.
us. But
Yeah.
sometimes I'll see loved ones or faith leaders um, say, well, why don't you just stop worrying about that? Or
Mm.
why don't you just stop engaging with that or thinking about that? It's really not a big deal. And I think that can
Yeah.
feel so
Mhm.
invalidating for the person that's experiencing that. So again, I love to come back to you don't need to get into the content one way or the other, but
Mm.
please, show up in a way that's empathetic in the midst of kind of that emotion that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And for faith leaders in particular, if we have clergy who listen to this at any point, I think clergy actually can have a really amazing role of even working with the treatment team, helping to lay out, well, what is authentic faith practice in our community? And
Mm.
how can we help separate out this person's faith from OCD? And
Yeah.
well, how do I help them find meaning in what they're stepping toward and as they're kind of engaging in these
Mm. Mm.
exposures? So there's
Mm.
other things that we can do as loved ones that aren't reassuring or accommodating.
Yeah. I like that. And would you say that the family members or loved ones can be included? I think that's what you were alluding to, included into the treatment
Yeah.
process. But could they be like actively part of the person getting management? I think from the perspective that they can see they're educated in what OCD and scrupulosity is all about, but then they're also learning ways to support and manage it from their perspective as well.
Absolutely. And I think, it's always, of course, up to the person in treatment of how much they kind of want their
Yeah,
family member involved in that
yeah.
treatment process. And there are
Mm,
typically
mm,
kind of
mm,
ROIs or releases of information about what that looks like.
hmm.
But I think
Yeah.
as much as the family member or loved one can get educated on
Mm,
OCD and learn what's going on, how do I respond,
mm,
it can be so
mm,
helpful both for the sufferer, but also for the family member who's seeing something so challenging to know how to respond. So I'm a big fan for families in particular of space training.
okay.
And Space training, we often think of, and I can put the resource for that too, but we often think of
Thank you.
as for parents with younger children, but it actually can
Hmm.
be for parents with children of all ages. And I've also heard for other family members who are not parents learning to support families. And it's considered in the IOCDF treatment guide actually as something that's an evidence-based modality for supporting family
Okay.
members.
Amazing. Um, what gives you hope when you work with people struggling with scrupulosity?
Yeah. I think, gosh. So, I mean, definitely there's a piece of my own experience of being able to turn pain into purpose or mess into message or however we want to say that,
Yeah.
struggle into strength. Um, but also just, gosh, I love the people that I work with on a daily basis. Every single person that I have the pleasure of working with who's navigating scrupulosity or OCD. They're just the best, most wonderful people. And I want y'all to know if you're listening to this, you're included in that. And I always like to say yes, you, because I know OCD says it's different for you. But OCD is so mean, and yet the individuals who navigate OCD are some of the most creative, empathetic, compassionate, just awesome people I've ever
Mm,
met. And
mm,
I think what gives me hope is seeing that person beyond the OCD and knowing like we get to step past everything OCD is saying about you and you really can reclaim your life. And I'll say
mm,
I'll get emotional a lot when I first come on to I'll work with a lot of clinicians on different cases and kind of come on with someone and I'll meet with someone and they'll say, like, Katie, I've been doing this thing for a while. I don't think I can step through it. Like, it's not possible for
mm,
me. It's possible for
mm,
everybody else, but not for
mm,
me. And
mhm,
I hear it again and again. And I think one of my favorite, it's always an emotional moment for me. And also, one of my favorite things is kind of seeing the person past that and being able to say, no, you can step forward. And this isn't just for everybody else. This is for you too. There really
mm,
is hope in that. And I've seen it again and
mm,
again. And it's really a gift to see people move
mm,
from feeling so stuck to being able to
mhm,
reclaim their faith or just
mm,
their life in
mm.
general.
What I really liked what you said at the beginning was there can be so much shame, guilt, responsibility, a disconnection from your faith, your higher power, your spirituality. But at the end of it, you see individuals come closer. You see them gravitating towards their higher power. And that like brings me hope. I find that so beautiful that someone can feel so disconnected as a result of just trying to do this whole ritual and everything just perfect in order to be closer to God or make sure that everything is right. And that is potentially bringing them away. But when they actually confront and when they're sticking with the icky bit part of that, which I love so much,
Thank you.
they find themselves so much closer to God, to that higher power. And I really love that.
No, and I love that you resonate with that or that resonates with you because
Mm,
it's I
mm,
mean the most common thing I hear from folks on a daily basis in groups is
yeah,
I am doing all of these things and yet I feel nothing. I don't feel connected to God. Why do I feel
yeah,
so disconnected?
mm,
And the really beautiful thing is sometimes when we
mm,
stop doing all of these things to try to feel connected, we actually get to
yeah,
feel a lot more connected at the
mm,
end of the day.
mm.
And that's really beautiful.
I think this ties into what we've just spoken about, but for someone who is listening today who feels trapped by guilt, fear, or doubt, what would you want them most to know?
Mhm. Yeah, that whatever is OCD is saying to you right now, or however intense the feelings are, you are absolutely not alone, and there
Mm,
is still hope. And I always like to say this. This always sounds a little funny, but you are so special. Your OCD, not so much. OCD always likes to tell us that it's so special, or that it's different, or that ours is the one that can't be fixed. I thought that for years, all of
mm,
the things.
mm,
And I just
Mm.
want you to know you are special as the awesome human that you are. But your OCD, I don't know if this dates me, but I always like to say Shania Twain, that don't impress me much. Um, and I want you to know that if your OCD is saying it's different and you can't get past this, it is lying to you, trying to keep
Yeah.
you stuck.
Mm.
And you, as the awesome person that you
Mm.
are so worthy of continuing to hold on to that little ounce of hope and stepping
Mm.
forward because you can do this.
Thank you. I'm gonna find a way of how I can use that. You don't impress me much. I'm gonna steal that from you. I love that. We've spoken
Thank
a
you.
lot about a lot of things.
Yeah.
I do see a question.
Yeah.
So there is a question, so we'll get to that. Before that, though, if I can just remove that, I want to see your face. Is there anything that you want to share that we haven't yet discussed or covered that you like? It's pressing. Meryl didn't get to this question, or she didn't ask me this. Is there anything that you want to share?
Oh, I think we hit on so much. And of course, this is a
Yeah,
topic I
we
can
did.
talk about for the next like 60 hours. But I think in terms of summarizing, I think we hit on so many beautiful things.
Mm,
And the biggest thing that
mm,
I want folks to be able to walk away with is that scrupulosity is just another gross flavor of that same OCD ice cream that happens to latch on to faith and morality. There is
mm,
hope through evidence-based treatment. And treatment
mhm.
can be something so spiritual that doesn't remove you from your faith, that helps you actually reconnect with it. I think if we get to walk out with those takeaways, I think we're in a good spot.
Great, thank you. So there is a question for us. I would be interested in hearing more on treatment for those who have religious trauma and religious scrup OCD or scrupulosity. I've just learned something new. There you go. I'm finding my scrupulosity ERP is triggering a dissociation response
Mm,
and invalidation responses that are related to chronic stress or
yeah.
trauma. I've successfully treated OCD with ERP for other themes, but I think this trauma is throwing me and my therapist for a loop. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for sharing this question. And I'll give some
Mm,
information if you want to reach out after too, because I think there are probably lots of nuances here, and I would love to hear a little
mm,
bit more.
mm,
But I'll
mm,
say as a whole, so I'm really passionate about this intersection. And again, there isn't a ton of research on it yet. We're kind of working on this because I think it's there's kind of this chicken or the egg piece of what comes first, religious trauma or scrupulosity.
yeah.
I would say a lot
Mm,
of people are predisposed to have OCD and then might have really
mm-hmm,
challenging
mm-hmm,
adverse religious experiences
mm,
or spiritual abuse or experience religious
yeah,
trauma. And
yeah.
my non-technical term is that it comes together in kind of a double whammy where you're hearing these
Mm,
really
mm,
challenging things in your faith community that are really similar to what your OCD is saying. And pulling that apart, I just want to validate for the person putting this question here is so hard. And it makes sense that when you're
yeah,
engaging in ERP, oh my goodness, your body doesn't know how to respond and there's chronic stress and trauma. So validating that. So sometimes what I've seen for folks is that actually bringing in a trauma specialist or engaging in trauma treatment alongside that OCD treatment can
yeah.
be really helpful, whether that's things related to prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy or EMDR. I've worked on a lot
Mm-hmm,
of cases where someone's working with both kind of that OCD specialist and that trauma
mm,
specialist
mm,
together to kind of
yeah,
navigate both of those pieces. Sometimes
yeah,
one will happen first, sometimes they'll happen in conjunction. I think there's kind of different ways to approach that. But I do just want this person to know I've seen this again and again as an overlap, and there is so much hope in stepping through this, just kind of with that
mm,
right
mm,
combination of treatment.
mm, mm,
I also think moving slowly and that the self-compassion piece is really, really big. And just knowing that this is really hard and you are so
yeah.
deserving of love as you move through this. So I would be happy if you want to reach out and I can give some more resources in this area. But also, one of the things in Stick with the Ick, we have specifically a religious trauma support group for people who are navigating religious trauma and scrupulosity treatment. And we also have a chaplain like me who specializes
Mm,
specifically in the religious trauma and the scrupulosity side that is actually
mm,
really good at
mm.
navigating some of this too. So I'm more than happy to connect you with her also. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. So we have one other question, and I hope we have some time to get through it. So if anyone does have questions, because I just want to get this across
Oh yeah.
quickly, if anyone has any questions, they can email stopocd at support@stopocd.com, and I can answer them from Stop OCD's perspective or forward them on to Katie. But Katie, you also would like to share
Yeah.
some of your contact details or your social media handles? Your content is really great and informative.
No, I would love that. Folks can find me lots of different places. The place that has all platforms for me together is actually faithandocd.com. So faithandocd.com, that's an easy place to find all things
Yeah.
stick with the ick, from resources for individuals with OCD, our communities, our resources for clinicians and clergy.
Mm.
The community is also at stickwiththeick.com, but I always say faithandocd.com is just an easy place to find everything. And then on pretty much any social media platform, you can find me at Stick with the Ick.
Good.
So easy,
Amazing.
easy to find. And email wise, you of course can share with Stop No CD and they can pass it along to me, but it's also pretty easy. It's just Katie,
Mm.
Katie at
Mm.
stickwiththeick.com. So pretty much anything faith
Great.
and OCD or Stick with the Ick, you can find me.
And for those who are interested in treatment with Stop OCD, you've made it all the way to the end. So we like to give a promo code for you. So that's webinar 100, and that will give you $100 off your first month. There's one final question here, Katie. We have 2 minutes. How to help a teen, but I'd like to broaden that on to anyone who doesn't want to get into ERP, or maybe they're just resistant or not ready for treatment. What would you say to this individual?
Oh gosh, I have so many thoughts. I think it first of all, I know that's so hard, especially when you see the benefit of treatment for them and you
Yeah,
want to push them toward that. Oh my
yeah,
goodness. I
yeah.
would say it can be a journey and a process, and to be patient. I always encourage folks,
Mm,
you don't have to push too hard right now, but you can open up the options, and you can
mm,
continue to plant seeds. I also think, especially for parents, engaging for yourself in things like space training or when a family
mhm,
member has OCD by John Hirschfield can be really great places to start so that you
yeah,
can respond in a certain way. But
yeah.
then sometimes starting them not by saying, okay, we're signing up for treatment today, but plugging them
Mhm,
into community spaces, which might even be like an IOCDF live stream. There's free live streams all the time with community where we talk about what it means to be in
mm.
community with OCD. So
Or
I
even
think,
something like this,
or
like just
something like
having,
this.
yeah,
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 just getting them on
yeah,
here and saying,
yeah.
hey, would love just for you to learn a little bit more
Yeah.
about OCD or to
Mm,
know you're not alone or to
mm,
connect with other people with all the
mm.
awesome resources at Stop OCD. And that doesn't mean necessarily telling them, hey, we have to start treatment right now, but just getting to
Yeah,
understand it.
yeah.
I'll say for me, I watched a lot of things on social media kind of silently before getting into treatment. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that can be a really big piece of just letting them first know they're not alone as they step toward that.
Thank you so much. I'm really sad that we have to end. Yeah, I really look forward to chatting to you again. I think there is so much more that we can say. I really appreciate you being here and sharing so much knowledge and passion and energy around this topic. So thank you so much, Katie. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. And we're definitely going to be in touch to see what else we can do in this community together. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been such an honor. Thank you so much for having me and just for the
You're
beautiful
welcome.
conversations and discussion and all that you do at Stop OCD. And for
Oh, you're
everybody who's
welcome.
here with us live or who's watching later,
Yes,
just there's
agreed.
hope. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Have a
Thank you.
wonderful rest of your evening or day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.